There's no end to the ways that we could look at how our culture portrays what a woman should be. Those in our culture who even understand what a woman is or could define what things are. We're at a strange time in our culture. What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a mom on Mother's Day? One of the most interesting pictures I thought of this week as I was thinking of how the world portrays things is the White Witch in C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. She is at one and the same time a woman of beauty who holds men under her power and her sway, and they flock to her and they want to follow her and serve her. And she is strong. She has incredible power and ability, and she seems to have a certain nobility to her. She was the great empress of the land of Karn in this series of books. And she brings people under her spell, like the young Edmund, who, like the great magician Uncle Andrew before him and little Diggory, were caught up in her charms and in her spells and want to serve her and follow her. He nestles into her sleigh, he gets under the blankets, he takes the Turkish delight and the hot cocoa that she gives him, and he quickly falls into being her servant and following whatever she desires. But in interesting ways, Lewis portrays her with this cool exterior beauty, but underneath she has the characteristics of a child of Satan himself. She hates, she lies, she plans evil, she carries it out. At her sight, she's enticing, but she is the personification of pure evil in the Narnian universe, a satanic temptress responsible for bringing evil to wherever she exists. No wonder Dee Breston, in a book called The Woman of Beauty, and she's a conference speaker and evangelical free church leader, she writes, "The world around us is always trying to squeeze us into its mold. It attempts to tell us how to define beauty, value, self-worth," and that list could go on and on and on. But the world too often focuses on the outward appearance and elevates physical beauty above things like kindness, integrity, and all the aspects of character that are so precious to God. No wonder our culture is so confused. No wonder families are struggling. No wonder women are struggling, be they young women, older women, aged women of all ages and all races and backgrounds. What does it mean to be a woman of God? What does it mean to follow God in our age? We turn this morning back to Acts chapter 16, where we've been in this series going through the book of Acts, and we've been in this great Roman colony. Yes, it's called Philippi. That might be the only time I tried to say that word today. And we find in these pages, even as we wrap up our story in this great city and finish chapter 16 today, we find in the midst of this city a godly woman. We've encountered her already. We've looked at Lydia before. We've talked a little bit about her. But I find it interesting that in this chapter 16, the church begins and ends with Lydia. The whole episode of Philippi is kind of bookended by Lydia and her faith and her household and how she serves God. So it seems to be a fitting way for us to end our time in this chapter, and as we kind of wrap up some of the important details about what takes place in this story. And then we're going to look a little more specifically at Lydia and how she seems to be a good model for us today of what it means to be a godly woman. So let's turn to Acts chapter 16. I'm going to start at verse 35 and read through the end of the chapter, verse 40. We've talked at length about this great city already, but here we go. What's the fallout after the great earthquake? Verse 35. Now, when day came, the chief magistrates sent their policemen saying, "Release those men." Now, to the first century reader, this is going to be a bit surprising. Paul and Silas and others had just been flogged. They'd been beaten. They'd been put in prison. Why? Because they're accused of violating the sanctity of Rome. They're accused of teaching things that it's unlawful for Romans to hear. They've been accused of throwing the city into confusion, to to bring new proclamations and to talk about customs and things that the Romans should never even hear of. And the magistrates were angry. The crowd was angry. They had them been beaten and thrown in prison. So it would be surprising to the unassuming reader who's hearing the story for the first time to say, the next day the magistrate said, well, release them now. Just set them free. What? Why? I have to think that in the first century, a century where the pagan culture is dominated by signs and omens and good days and bad days and luck and auspices, that earthquake shook them to the core. Something happened during the night where these magistrates, I believe, saw an omen or saw some understanding that ever since we did that to these men, our city has been in chaos. There's been an earthquake and tragic things have happened all around town. But regardless of the reasons why, the magistrates say, set them free. Go and get them out of town. So, verse 36, the jailer reported these words to Paul saying, well, the chief magistrates have sent to release you. So come out and go now in peace. But Paul said to him, oh, they have beaten us in public without a trial. We who are Roman citizens. And they have thrown us into prison, and now they want to send us away secretly? No, indeed, but let them come themselves and bring us out. And we don't really have a great cultural comparison to understand this. That Paul is saying, oh, wait a minute. We're Roman citizens. We have rights. And a Roman citizen should never be flogged or beaten under the common laws. This is a Roman colony. This is like a little Rome away from Rome, where especially here, all the laws of the empire should apply to Roman citizens. They never should have been treated the way they were. They certainly never should have been punished without an official trial. And by official trial, I mean a court date set for Roman citizens. This is a huge, grave error on the parts of the local authorities. Perhaps somewhere during the night they got word. Did you know these men that you beat were Roman citizens? They obviously had no idea. They never would have carried out these actions if they had understood who they were. So now Paul claims his Roman citizenship. It's not going to be the last time in the book of Acts where he uses his identity as a citizen of Rome, holding that valuable passport, those papers that declare to him certain rights and protections throughout the empire. So he says, we're not just going to slink off here. We want them to come and set us free. Now, why is he doing that? Is it because of his pride? Is it some sense of arrogance as a Roman citizen? I truly think as we read the next passages, and as we look at the history of the church here, Paul knows that the church in Philippi, it's new, it's just in its incipient form, and it's already come under persecution because the leaders have been dragged off to trial and beaten. But I believe Paul understands if he can establish that he has done nothing wrong, that he has said nothing wrong, he's violated no Roman decrees, that this gathering of people he started, this church he started, will not be seen as a group of treasonous rabble-rousers, but rather seen as a legally formed entity that also has rights and protections in a Roman colony. Because Paul says, let them come themselves and bring us out. Verse 38, when the policemen reported these words to the chief magistrates, they were afraid when they heard that they were Romans. Maybe one or two during the night heard something, maybe not. Maybe just the earthquake was around. But now they all clearly understand, we did this to Roman citizens, now we're in trouble. And now the emperor himself, or certainly one of the leading rulers, can come and have serious issues with our local authority because we have violated the great laws of the land. So they're frightened. And they came, and the magistrates appeal to Paul and Silas. And when they brought them out, they kept begging them to leave the city. I know you heard the story. I know if you grew up in church, you've seen this a lot, but can we just pause and try to put ourselves in the place of the first century? Roman authorities flex their stuff and they beat these rabble-rousers and throw them into prison. But during the night, there's an earthquake and the prison doors are open. And the next morning, the magistrates are like, all right, let them go. Send them away quietly. No. Now demands are made. Paul and Silas were not afraid in prison. They were singing praise to God. But now we've got Roman magistrates who are afraid of these missionaries. And they're begging them and entreating them to please don't bring trouble on us. Please don't call Rome down on us. Please just leave the city quietly and peacefully. It's an amazing scene, the turnaround. And I think an important one for the church in Philippi, and this was Paul's reasoning. Because now you've got Roman authorities who are like, we dare not do anything more to these men. And we dare not mess with their friends who have gathered around them and who are with them. Because they've done nothing wrong, and they are Roman citizens. So they begged them to leave the city. And Paul and Silas went out of the prison and then entered the house of Lydia. And there they saw all the brethren, and they encouraged them, and they departed. The scene of our story today, the fallout of the earthquake. There was the ordered release by the magistrates. Paul asserts his rights as a Roman citizen. The magistrates come to them afraid of Rome, perhaps seeing the earthquake as an omen. The church is already gathered together. Presumably, they've been praying all night at Lydia's house for Paul and Silas. Paul and Silas end up encouraging them, speaking words to them. We don't know the exact content of that. But all of these actions strengthen and protect the church in Philippi. When Paul writes his letter to the Philippians, we have that, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. That letter to the church at Philippi is written about 12 years after these events. And one of the things we see in the first century, many of the churches, like they're going to go down the road to Thessalonica next in chapter 17. That church is going to come under intense persecution. It's going to be one of the most difficult places on earth to be a Christian in the first century. They're going to ravage the Christian church. They're going to kill the Christians that are there, torture Christians who are there. It's going to be an intensive time of persecution. Many of the churches in many of the cities of the empire are going to see great difficulty and persecution. We don't read about persecution in the church in Philippi. In fact, the historical supporting material of the first century doesn't talk about an outbreak of persecution against the church in Philippi. Even though it's a Roman colony, and you would think a new religion, a different religion, the decrees of Caesar, that would be something that would take place in Philippi. We don't see that. When Paul writes his letter to encourage them, we don't hear about the intense persecution or the lives that have been lost, unlike in the letters to the Thessalonians. I think a great deal of that is because of the events that happened on this day. By Paul reasserting his Roman citizenship, establishing that they've done nothing wrong, in fact, their rights have been violated, the city leaders are afraid for what they've done. They don't raise a hand against Paul and Silas again, nor do they seem to raise any persecution against the church. So, important events for us to have in mind because this gives us such a great background to the letter to the Philippians that's written 12 years later. Paul's going to reference some of the things, some of the beginnings of the church and how it was founded in that letter. It's important for us to see these things. And that's the end of the story in Philippi because chapter 17, verse 1 says, now when they had traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia, in other words, they move on down the road and they go to Thessalonica. It seems, just a brief note here for our story where we pick up next week, it seems like Luke himself is probably left behind in the city of Philippi. Why do we say that? Because in chapter 17, the first verse says, now when they traveled, and they came to a synagogue of the Jews. And in these next days, as we read what happened in Thessalonica, it's they did this and they did that. Where remember, we saw early on in this chapter, back in chapter 16, verse 11, Luke is talking about what they had done, and then all of a sudden in verse 11 it's like, and then we made a straight course through Samothrace. And we traveled from there to Philippi. And when we came into the city, so Luke was their traveling companion since that vision of the Macedonian man, and he traveled with them to Philippi, ministered with them in Philippi, and seems to stay behind in Philippi, at least for a while, and says they went on. Now, some chapters from now, we're going to see a little bit later, and then we went on. So we're going to see that Luke was in Philippi, and then likely moved to some other cities and continued to minister and collect information for his gospel as well, and eventually rejoins Paul at a different time, and we'll see that when it comes to it down the road. So this is sort of the intro. This is sort of the groundwork. This is how we wrap up the story and see things finishing up in Philippi. I want to turn now to this idea that where did they go when they got out of jail? To Lydia's house. Why? Because that has become now the foundation of the church. That's where the church gathers together. We're just going to look at her for a while and who is this godly woman and what are some of the things that marked out Lydia as a godly woman? Why would we see her as an example today? So I just kind of want to recap her life as we've seen it in chapter 16. First of all, Lydia sought to serve God. She didn't have all the knowledge in the world. She didn't have great training and instruction. It seems like when they first find her here in chapter 16, under verse 13, she's only able to follow what she's already learned about God. She doesn't even know about Jesus yet, but she is seeking after the one true God. Look at verse 13 of chapter 16. On the Sabbath day, we went outside the gate to a riverside where we were supposing there would be a place of prayer. And we sat down and began speaking to the women who had assembled there. And a certain woman named Lydia, from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple fabric, a worshiper of God, was listening, and the Lord opened her heart. And that's when she got the full revelation of Jesus Christ, his death, burial, and resurrection, the true hope of salvation. But we find, first of all, that she's there where at a place of prayer. I mean, she's seeking after God. She's going out to the place where others are gathering for whatever reason outside the city gate. And Paul, Silas, and Luke have somehow heard that there's a group of women who meet out there and do some spiritual stuff. That's why they went out there to see. But Lydia has put herself in a group of people and a place where they are praying for God's wisdom. They're praying for God's direction. They're praying for God's revelation. That marks out a godly woman. She's one who seeks to be in a place of prayer. And secondly, she's worshiping God. Now, again, at this point, we would say she doesn't even know who Jesus is yet. She knows there is a God, and perhaps all she knows is Romans 1 and 2 would tell us. From creation, she has learned there is a God. She knows there must be one true God. Perhaps she had interacted with some Jewish people along the way and found out about how they serve this one true creator God, Yahweh. We don't know what all Lydia understood up to verse 14. But she's seeking after him, and she's crying out to him, and she is worshiping him the best that she knows how. And so I'd ask this morning, particularly women who desire to be a godly woman, do you regularly put yourself in a place of prayer? Now, on Sunday that could be here, but what about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday? Do you regularly seek out a place of prayer? And then that could be at your house, that could be at your kitchen table early in the morning with a cup of coffee. That could be in your favorite chair or glider rocker. It could just be a posture of prayer. As you're driving the kids to and from school or whatever, and grocery shopping, all the things. Do you put yourself in times and places of prayer? Are you seeking after God throughout the week? Do you have regular times where you draw your attention to him, where you have things that remind you to stop and to pray? And do you pray throughout the day as other things are going on? These are some of the characteristics of a godly woman. She seeks to serve God. Secondly, she seeks to serve others. It's pretty obvious from the beginning when they meet Lydia. She is a woman of some means. She's a businesswoman from the distant city of Thyatira. In fact, that is in the region called Lydia. So here again, this may not even be this woman's proper name. It's what they've called her. She's the Lydian. She's the one from that far place called Lydia. And she's a seller of purple. We haven't gone into an in-depth study of this, but that was a very valuable commodity in her day. They would take certain little mollusk-type things from the sea that were found very much near Lydia and Thyatira, and they would crush them and process them in a certain way that they would leach out this purple liquid that was used for dyeing fabric. And of course, purple is seen as a color of royalty and power and position. So the fact that she's a seller of purple fabric means she's serving the upper echelon of society. She's a woman of great influence and power. And the fact that she's referenced alone and that she petitions Paul and she comes to him and talks to him seems to signify that she is a woman of some great character, leadership, and ability. And she uses that then to serve others. It tells us in verse 15, after Lydia and her household had been baptized, she urged us, saying, if you have judged us to be faithful to the Lord, come into my house and stay. And she prevailed upon us. Other translations would say, she persuaded us, she urged us. In fact, she begged us to take advantage of her hospitality. Can I just say something else I just saw in this verse for the first time this week? Lydia becomes a believer, and she is baptized with her whole household. Can I just say we've got a central woman in this story of the gospel breaking into Europe for the first time. She is the first convert in the entire continent of Europe. She is the first one in all of Europe. If you think of the great history of Europe and the churches of Europe, the churches of the Reformation, none of those exist without Lydia. And she is put at the head of a long line of thousands of years of faithful followers of Christ that will come from Europe. And she is identified as the leader of her household. She is not known because of her husband and the position he holds. If she even has a husband, we're not sure. She's not known by who her influential children are. The household could just be her servants and those who attend to her. We don't know whether or not she's married. We don't know whether or not she's a mom. It intrigues me that this is a woman who is not known by her motherhood. She's not known by her wifedom. She is known by her character, and that she is a follower and a worshiper of God, and then becomes a follower of Jesus Christ. There's a lot of talk today about identity, and there's a lot of talk today about who you are and how you are to define yourself, how you understand yourself in your place. There's a lot of talk within the evangelical community about the value of women and how we're to understand that and what their roles are to be. Can I just say, I find Lydia a fascinating figure. She's not known as a mom. She's not known as a wife. She's not known as any other. She is known as a leading follower of Jesus Christ. I think that's part of what makes her a great model for every woman. Whether you're a young woman, whether you're a mom and with lots of kids, whether you're a divorcee, whether you're an older woman who's never been married, whether you're widowed, I think Lydia is a great example. She is not defined by her family relationships or other relationships. She is defined as a worshiper of God. And the Bible says nothing but great things about her. She prevails upon them. Come into my home. She's leading this home. She's in charge of this home. And she seeks to serve others with it. She's obviously quite hospitable. We got Paul and Silas and Timothy and Luke, and who knows how many might be traveling with them. She's got a large household. Just come, make this your home. Make this your base of operations. Clearly, her house then becomes synonymous with the local church. In verse 40, where do Paul and Silas go when they get out of jail? They go to Lydia's house. And we get the idea it's not just, oh, they had to get their stuff before they left town. No, the church is already gathered there, with the sense that the church has been gathered there through the night, praying and probably fasting and calling out to God on the behalf of Paul and Silas. She's so hospitable that her very home becomes synonymous with the brethren, the place of worship, the place of gathering for the church. It's a great model of generosity. It's a great model of serving others, of being hospitable to the point of becoming the lifeblood of the church. But also she's generous with all of her resources. Obviously with her home, we just talked about that. But I think there's some other clear indications here in the story. She's a businesswoman. She's a successful businesswoman. It seems like she is financially able to support this team of apostle missionaries as they're in the city. But there's some other indications too that she continues this with great generosity. When we do look at the letter to the Philippians, I told you that it was written 12 years later. Lydia is not named in the letter. We're not sure if she's still in Philippi. I mean, she was from another country. She was doing business here. We don't know exactly what happened to her. But in Paul's letter to the Philippians in chapter 4, he talks about his relationship with that church from the very beginning. In other words, from the days in Lydia's household. And look what he says in chapter 4 of Philippians, verses 14 to 16. Nevertheless, you have done well to share with me in my affliction. You yourselves also know, Philippians, that at the first preaching of the gospel, in other words, from the very beginning of establishing a ministry in Europe, after I departed from Macedonia, even after I left Philippi, no other church shared with me. No other church shared in the matter of giving and receiving, but you alone. For even in Thessalonica, remember we said he went right down the road from Philippi, he went through some other cities and ended up in Thessalonica some days later. Even in Thessalonica, you sent a gift more than once for my needs. What does that mean? We know that when Paul and Silas left Philippi and went to Thessalonica, they were only in Thessalonica a short time, a matter of several weeks or just a couple of months. And Paul says, even then, 12 years ago, at the very beginning, back in Acts 16, after we left the city of Philippi, where you had cared for us, and you blessed us, and you encouraged us, and strengthened us, and sent us on our way, you heard when we got to Thessalonica how things were going, and you sent us a gift, a financial blessing, more than once. In just a few weeks' time, again and again, you were supplying for our needs and giving to us. They were a great sending church. They were a great mission-supporting church in Philippi. They've become Paul and Silas's greatest supporters. That's kind of their home church now. Yeah, they came from Antioch, but this church in Philippi is the one that supports their ministry. And even 12 years later, after all of Paul's travels, they've sent him another gift. That's the occasion for this letter. They sent him another financial blessing, and he's sending back some information to let him know that he's received that gift and so much more from them over the years in their partnership. I have to assume Lydia was a major part of that funding, of that giving from the very beginning. That when Paul says again and again and again from the very beginning you supported me, the church is in her house. She's the leading woman of the church. She's the first convert. She seems to have a successful business and a home large enough for everybody to come and gather in, a large household. She is the one supporting this ministry to great degree. She's generous with her resources in supporting those who are going out to take the gospel to the world. So much so that in chapter 4 of Philippians, verse 18, Paul says this to the church, I have received everything in full. That's kind of a technical way. I got your gift. Thank you so much. I want to let you know that it got here safely. I have an abundance. I am amply supplied. The church is still giving greatly to them. Having received from Epaphroditus, that's the person who carried the gift to Paul, having received from you what you have sent, a fragrant aroma, an acceptable and pleasing sacrifice to God. That word fragrant aroma is interesting here. Because Paul says what you sent is It's just a pleasant gift. It's a fragrant aroma. Some of you moms today are going to get flowers. I got to tell you, I stopped at Sunfresh this morning to get donuts for the worship team. There was a line of guys waiting to look at the greeting cards. There were like 8 guys around their little Mother's Day. I'm like, it is Sunday morning, guys. Come on. I mean, I got mine yesterday. What are you waiting for? They couldn't all get to the rack at the same time because there's just not that many cards. And they're all standing there waiting to get to the Mother's Day card. And where the flowers were, normally on Sunday morning, I go to that and I walk right up to the express lane. I'm the only one in the store. And I get my donuts and I go, today, there were like 7 or 8 people in 3 different lines. And you know what? They were all men. And they all had a card in one hand and flowers in the other. And I thought, well, I mean, better late than never, right? And I thought, that's a fragrant aroma, right? Some of your houses are going to be filled with these fragrant aromas. Some of you have taken flowers or gotten flowers from mom or for someone else. And we see that it's such a, these roses smell so beautiful. They have such a nice aroma to them. Paul is saying your gift was this fragrant aroma. It's just amazing. And the Greek word for that is the word euodia. You is often the prefix for good things, and then odia, like odor. It's good smelling. In that same chapter, in chapter 4 of Philippians, Paul starts talking about the division in the church and the problems that are going on in the church. And on one end he says, your gift, probably through Lydia, maybe, we don't know if she's still there or not. But the church itself, in the spirit of Lydia and their founder, is giving this pleasant aroma, this pleasing thing. But in verse 2, we found out there's a civil war going on in the Philippian church. This church that was founded in unity, this church that was founded with a foreign businesswoman, a demon-possessed slave girl, and a pagan Roman jailer. What a great church plant. God brought them together in unity, and that unity has been a strength of theirs from the beginning. But now there's 2 women in the Philippian church, and Paul calls them out by name. And they are dividing the church. They are not godly women. They had the appearance and form of godliness, but Paul says, you're destroying the church of God. You're destroying the partnership there. And one of them is named here in verse 2 as Syntyche, which actually means come together in good fortune. And the other one's name, literally, is Euodia. She should be a fragrant sacrifice. She should be good smelling. She should smell right in the church. But instead, she's literally a stinker. I mean, she's causing this division in the church, and her name is Euodia, and Paul says, Euodia and Syntyche, come together in harmony, help these women who shared my spirit. And at the end of the church, he goes, you know who really smelled good? Lydia. She smelled right. Do you use that expression in your family? Pam and I we'll just briefly meet somebody in the store and later go, I think that guy was a believer. He just smelled right. He just kind of gave off that aroma of God, and he talked about blessings, and Paul says, the one who gives generously of the resources, it's a pleasing aroma to God. Others who might have a good name, they're really just stinkers. Anyway, I find that fascinating. There you go. What do we do with some of this today? We've seen some traits and some virtues that marked out Lydia and seem to mark out the founding of the Philippian church. It's going to be a great foundation for you. Anytime you go read the book of Philippians, come back to this and go, remember how the church was started. Remember how God did things way back when. What do we do with it today? Question for each and every one of us, but particularly moms, women who seek to be godly women. Do you put God at the center of everything? Lydia was seeking to serve God. She was seeking to serve others. These indicate to me God was not just a part of Lydia's life. God was not just on the list of things to do, and once she spent time with God, check, now I can go off to my other business. I believe God was at the very center. Not simply a spoke on the wheel, not simply one of the tasks to be accomplished. He was at the heart of her life. Do you put God at the center of your life? Is he at the center of your family? At the center of your decisions? Many faithful families in this church, just because you're part of one doesn't mean that you have put God at the center of your own life. Do you have him there? Are you fixated on God? Simple step, do you have a time and place to pray? Lydia was known. I mean, people in the area, evidently, she's that woman who goes out to that place to do that prayer thing to her God. Someone told Paul and Silas that in Acts 16. Someone pointed out to them that there's a group of women who regularly go out to pray. Do you have regular times of prayer? Do you have some way that you've carved out at least a few moments for you to spend regular time and a regular place to pray? And I don't mean you have to go off somewhere. It could be a gathering with others, but do you just have a time, a place where you gather and pray? Do you have a time and place to worship? You know, you can worship more than once a week. You can worship more than just Sunday morning. Corporate worship is good, and it's part of the instruction for the church. But daily worship is good also. Do you have a time and place to worship? Do you have routines or habits? If you have a few moments in the car or a few moments here and there where you can add worship to your other busy schedule things of the day. And for all of us, do you view your resources as belonging to God? Not just, well, of course, I mean, we give our tithe, our portion to God. That's His. No, do you view all of your resources as belonging to God? And you're simply returning to Him part of the gift. We don't know how much Lydia gave. If she's the main giver, we really don't know for certain. But we certainly seem to have this pretty good picture of someone who said, all that I have is available to God. My home, my servants, my financial blessings, my business, everything that I have been given is to be used to serve God. That church again and again gave Paul and Silas gifts, even in the weeks after they left. They're blessing others through what God has given to them. Do you have that perspective? And then as we wrap this up, I have felt like this might be a special gift to give on Mother's Day. I have a mom. I have a wife who's a mom. I have a daughter who is a mom. I'm around lots of moms, and I talk to lots of moms. And sometimes we get to these Mother's Day sermons, and yes, I chose to have part of Proverbs 31 read, and that ideal woman and what she does. But I also know that sometimes in this world and in these lives, to be a Christian mom is a terribly difficult thing. To be the right kind of Christian mom, and you get put under this, well, not only do you have a time to pray, but do you pray enough? Do you pray the right things for your kids? Do you have the power of a praying mom, the power of the praying mom of toddlers, the power of a praying mom of whatever other book Stormy O'Mardian has written about powerful praying women? Do you match up? Are you doing enough? Not just do you find some time, have you found enough? And it's almost a shaking of the finger at moms. Do you worship enough? And there's this hard balance of, there are some characteristics of serving and following God. But I'm afraid too often in our evangelical churches, we set these standards that almost no one could maintain. They're really unreasonable and unnecessary. They're not gracious. They're not empowered by the Spirit of God. They're empowered by rules and legalism and laws and measuring up and matching up enough. So let me tell you one of the greatest verses today, maybe for some of our moms. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 and 10. Paul is in this passage talking about who worthwhile ministers are. What does it take to be a worthwhile servant of God? What does it take to be one of the best at the front of the following Jesus line? How do you get there? How do you be qualified for ministry? And I would say it's also cross-applies, how do you qualify for being a good woman, a good mom, a good wife, just a good woman in the church who may not have a husband or kids? 2 Corinthians 12, let us not forget these verses 9 and 10. Paul is talking about what makes a great minister. God has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will boast about my weaknesses, that the power of Christ may dwell in me. I'm well contented with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecution, with difficulty, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Maybe sometimes there's too many messages about being the perfect wife, the perfect mom, the best mom. Not just did the kids survive the day, did the kids get fed in bed at some point, but did you feed them right? Did you do the right? You shouldn't give them sugar. You shouldn't give them too much of that. And you hear all these voices, and you can see it on Pinterest or Instagram or from your own parents or wherever it is. You let your kids eat that? You should never let your kids eat that. The standards, right? And yes, we want to pursue excellence, but sometimes in that pursuit of excellence, we forget there is power in weakness. We've got a 23-year-old daughter with 2 kids, 1 year old and younger. Just getting them through the day alive is enough some days. We raised 2 kids. It's not easy being a parent to 23 and 20-year-old either. But I remember when the kids were little, and sometimes my wife would feel like she had gotten nothing done that day and felt bad about it. I'm like, are they still alive? Did they get fed at some point? Are they clean enough? We did good. It's a good day. Don't hear these characteristics of a godly woman as, you're not good enough, you're not doing enough. Please don't hear that from me. We all have things, we could work on. Paul had things, but at the heart of it, the grace of God is what we live by. We sang some songs this morning. Moms, they apply to you. I set my hope on Jesus. That's not just about what I am in church and living the Christian life. That's when the kids are driving you nuts and your husband hasn't helped, or he can't, or he's at work, or whatever else is going on, and all the things that happen. It's enough to stop and set your hope on Jesus. One of the songs said, he is stronger than darkness, new every morn. When the kids aren't sleeping and night is really hard, and one of them wakes up, and then the other one wakes up, and then the other, or you're not sleeping, or like, it's enough to say, he is stronger than darkness. His grace will be new again this morning. And in weakness, I can find strength. I don't have to have it all together. Men, can you join in on this too? Men who are trying to be the best men they can be, and be husbands and dads and take care of families and make enough income and have the right job or do the right things or meet the right standards. It's enough for us to say, I exist by the grace of God, and I need it every morning and every day. One of the great hymns that we sang has been rewritten now for new chorus, but it was actually written by Edward Mote in the middle of the Civil War. In the 1860s, he writes, I will not trust the sweetest frame. What does that mean? I'm not going to lean on anything else. Is it that kind of frame? Is it even the sweetest frame of mind, even those rich times where I'm in a good frame of mind and I feel, I don't know exactly. But I will not trust anything else, but I will wholly lean on Jesus' name. Moms, it's okay if that's all you got left to lean on. You can't look at what you got done during the day and how great it was and how successful you were as a mom and how everything just... When the days come that all you can do is just say, God, I need you desperately, that's a good place. Men, women of all ages in our congregation, Paul, the great apostle, says, I choose weakness. I find power in weakness. When I am weak, I am strong. And he is not just being a little self-deprecating here. Paul is talking about things he struggled with. Women, for some of you, your identity, do you match up? Have you done all you can? Have you done all you're supposed to do? Oh, that can be a great burden to live under. Potential is a harsh, harsh taskmaster. You will never be enough if you're trying to live up to your potential. It's okay to live out your weakness. It's okay to live out. Do I have a time and place of prayer? I get about 2 minutes a day to myself. That's enough. If your heart is turned to God. I don't want you to hear me putting some standard on all of you that you have to live up to other than the cross of Jesus Christ. We preach him and him crucified. And he declares, you were not enough. You were not good enough. You could never be good enough. That's why I died for you. It was a debt you could not afford. I paid it. You live in grace now. It's enough just to grasp onto him, to hold onto him, to carry you through, and not match up to all the other standards that are out there. We want to be a church that preaches Christ and him crucified. That means in your motherhood, as a wife, as a husband, as a businessman, as a dad, to each and every one of you, the cross of Christ is enough. The grace of God is enough. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your grace. We thank you that we live by your grace, that we learn again and again it's okay for us to be desperately depending on your grace. That's what you desire. Thank you for being gracious. Thank you that your mercies are new every morning, that your faithfulness is new every morning, that you know our frame, that we are but dust, that you love us and that you care for us, that the cross didn't make us good enough. The cross just brought us into your grace and your love. We thank you for that. Lord, we pray as a church for every mom that's here, represented here today, that your grace would be imparted to them. You would give them grace for today, and tomorrow you do it all over again and again. Thank you for the moms that you've given us. For some, that's a hard thing to say. For some, that's difficult. Thank you for bringing us to this point today, for giving us life, for bringing us into a place where we could gather together in your word and hear your revelation to us. Thank you for amazing examples all around us that we can look to and be thankful for, godly women, godly ministers, godly moms. We pray that you would care for and uplift those who struggle with that relationship with mom or who struggled with it while she was still with us. We pray grace into their lives as well, grace and peace in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.